time to go. I should start by saying thank you very much to the Pride Cymru people for inviting me here. Both of my parents grew up in Cardiff, and this is probably the first thing I've ever done in my life that they would be really proud of. Now, sadly, I failed to become number 10 for Wales, and my dad was dreadfully disappointed in me, but so there you go. So, anyway, I'm going to talk to you about Amazons, and I'm going to be using the roving mic because occasionally I'll need to come and point at things on the slides. So, Amazons, what do we know about them? Well, this is the view we have from Hollywood of beautiful women in very impractical boob armour. But real historical Amazons, if they existed, wouldn't have looked quite like that. They would have looked more like this. These are stills from a Russian TV documentary about a people known as the Sicilians, whom we believe are the historical example from which the legend of the Amazons is taken. Who were the Sicilians? Well, they were horse tribes in Central Asian steppes. They were the forerunners of the Huns and the Mongols. And some of you may have seen last year a major exhibition in the British Museum on Sicilian life. They weren't necessarily a single ethnic group. We think that they're probably a shared culture in much the same way as Celtic culture has been exhibited by people all the way from Ireland over to the Balkans. So where did the Sicilians live? Well, they're in and around the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, that sort of area. You can see we've got various nations, the Sicilians themselves, people called the Sarmatians, who we'll hear quite a bit about later, and also an area called Parthia. That might be a name known to you. So did they have women warriors? Well, we have not exactly contemporary evidence, but Herodotus, who was a Greek historian who lived a little later than the main period where the Amazons were supposed to be about, but he was born and brought up on the south shore of the Black Sea, which is an area where Amazons are supposed to have lived, and he talks about them being warriors, people who did not do women's work. And you know, you can be a woman warrior if you fight from horseback, because what's important then is your skill with a bow and your skill with a horse. You don't have to be big and strong in order to be a cavalry warrior. Now, this beautiful piece of bronze sculpture I've got here clearly shows somebody in Scythian costume, and they're also exhibiting something called the Parthian shot, and that's when you're galloping away from the enemy and you turn round in the saddle and fire your bow at them. That's something which requires an incredible amount of skill on the part of the archer, and also a really well-trained horse. And this piece of bronze here, that's from Etrusca in central Italy. So people in ancient Italy around the time of the founding of Rome who knew about the Scythians, who knew what they looked like and what they could do. We can also look at their burials. The Scythians used to bury their important dead in mounds, just like we did in our country. And in the Altai steppes of northern Mongolia, because it's very cold, the ice has preserved a lot of the burials. And around 20 to 35% of the warrior graves that have been found have been of women. This splendid piece of horse armour here sadly wasn't in the British Museum exhibition. It's in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, but it is absolutely gorgeous. Because of the ice, we also know that these women had fabulous tattoos. These are from a burial in Siberia, a place called Pazyryk. So gorgeous stuff there. Now, of course, when you talk to male historians about this, they'll say, blah, 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 blah. I mean, they might have been buried with weapons, so it's probably just a man burying his possessions together, his weapons, his horses, his women. And they say, well, actually, they've got battle wounds, some of them. In fact, some of their wounds do show the wounds caused by this thing. It's called a sagaris, and it's the traditional Scythian axe, which you see in many Greek paintings of Amazons. Then the men say, oh, they must have been cut down while they were running away. But if you look at the wounds that they've got, then clearly they were received while somebody was face on to whoever caused that wound. Another interesting thing about them is that they invented trousers because they rode horses, right? I mean, the Greeks poo-pooed this. According to the Greek men, the appropriate costume for a manly warrior was a short skirt with nothing underneath. This did not really do well when you were riding a horse. Trousers made much more sense. And we can also see that Amazon women, just like women today, were fond of leopard print. But their favourite design was this herringbone thing. And I got really excited when I discovered that Marks and Spencer's was selling leggings with a herringbone pattern. And I bought myself an Amazon costume. Yay! Now, Amazons are a common feature on Greek vases, and some of them look like Greek warriors, but many of them are in Scythian costume. You can see clearly that's a Scythian person that you've got there. In fact, Amazons are the second most popular subject for Greek vases after the mythical hero Heracles. They even made dolls for their girl children. You get these Amazon Barbies. This one is actually in the Louvre in Paris. So clearly somebody in Greece was quite obsessed by Amazons. The question is, were they lesbians? And that's kind of hard to answer. To start with, there's this question about what does it mean to be a lesbian. Now, homosexuality and heterosexuality as boxes that you put people in is a 19th century invention. Before the 19th century, sex was just something that people had, and people tended to have sex with who they felt like. They just had to be careful that the church didn't find out. So there was that. We also know, of course, that male warbands in ancient Greece were very much okay with male-male relations. We've got the legend of Achilles and Patroclus from the war on Troy. We've got the sacred band of Thebes, who were a real historical army, 300 warriors made up of 150 gay couples. So there's no doubt that this sort of thing went on amongst men in the ancient world. Why shouldn't it go on amongst women? And if you're Scythians, if you've got horse archers, women serving as horse archers, then they could have their own war bands and go off and do their own raiding. Now that quote from Herodotus that I showed you earlier on, that's when he was talking about the founding of the nation of Sarmatia. The story goes like this, that some Greeks had been raiding the south coast of the Black Sea, where the Amazons lived, and they captured a bunch of these women and were taking them off to sell them as slaves. And they were overpowered by the Amazons, who killed their captors, somehow managed to work out how to sail the boat, and they ended up on the north shore of the Black Sea, probably beached it on one of those lovely beaches in the Crimea or something like that. And then, of course, they were there, they were in a new place, they thought, well, we need to get ourselves sorted out. So they made camp and started looking for food and stuff. And the area wasn't uninhabited. The chaps from the local town came out and swaggered up to them and said, "Hey girls, you look like you're in need of husbands." And that's when they made that comment about, no, we're riders, we don't do the girly stuff, we're all about bows and spears and stuff. However, they went on to say, but if you fancy a bit of a tumble, we'd be up for that, because we need, like, more warriors. We have only one condition, and that is that if we bear sons, then you have to take them off our hands, because we don't want any boy stuff in our society. And that is the legend of the founding of Sarmatia. There's also a story that they tell about Alexander the Great. He defeated the Persians, and he was camped on the shores of the Caspian Sea when this army of women rode up. And the leader of this approached the Greeks and said, "We're looking for this fellow called Alexander, who apparently defeated the Persians in battle." "That's me," says Alexander. "I'm the greatest warrior in the known world." "Yeah, no," says the queen. "I, Thalestris, queen of the Amazons, are the greatest warrior in the known world. And you, Alexander, have been chosen to be the father of my next child. Oh, and by the way, these are my girls, they're all a bit horny too." And Alexander, although he was a bit insulted by this, knew his men would never forgive him if he said no, so they had a big feast and a party and everybody went away happy. So, what can we take from this? Well, probably if there were Amazon warbands, then they would have had relations with men because they needed babies. But amongst themselves, they probably, because ancient people did have sex on a regular basis, they probably did have sex with each other. But do we have any direct evidence that they were actually lesbians? Well, now we need to go into a little bit of detail about Greek vases. There are lots and lots of images on Greek vases of relations between men. And every so often you'll see a picture like this, where an older man is giving a rabbit or a hare to a younger man. And this was a traditional gift of love. If you fell in love with a young man, you would offer him a rabbit as a present, as a token of your love. Coming up to Valentine's Day, guys, you should remember this. Give your boyfriend rabbits. And there is this. This is the one example of this being done between two women. So we've got this woman on one side dressed in the leopard skin, and her name is a Greek word meaning huntress, and she is offering a rabbit to somebody who is clearly an Amazon from her dress and her weaponry, and she's labelled Penthesilea, who was the queen of the Amazons who fought on the side of the Trojans in the Trojan War. So that is a clear example of a love gift between two women from a Greek vase. So, did they live on Paradise Island? Right? Is there an island somewhere in the Mediterranean that was inhabited by Amazons? Well, here it is. Here's an island, and this is the capital, Mytilene, which is named after the Amazon princess who legend has it founded the city. Can anybody tell me what that island is?
Lesbos.
Yes, of course it is. It's Lesbos. Right? The home of the lesbians. How do I know that? Well, there's this Roman writer called Diodorus Siculus, who was a collector of legends. I have to admit that he was a bit credulous at times. If there's any sign of a godly miracle or something like that, he was right there saying, look, you'll never believe this, look what I found. But he tells this story of an Amazon queen called Marina, who terrorized the eastern Mediterranean. He says that she was based in Libya, but I think that's probably he misheard. I think she came from Lydia, which is an ancient name for Western Turkey. And he talks about her raiding all over that region. And he says that she founded colonies on Lemnos for herself and Lesbos, which she gave to her sister Mytilene for her island. Now, as I say, he's not the most reliable of narrators, but we do have corroborating evidence in the form of one of the versions of the tale of Jason and the Argonauts, where the Argo puts into Lesbos and they discover that the island is ruled by an Amazon queen. So, yeah, that's pretty good. And this is the archaeological evidence. It's a bit difficult to see, but this is a woman riding on a horse, and that is actually on the Isle of Lesbos. Also in Diodorus Siculus, he talks about Marina fighting an African tribe of Amazons called the Gorgons, a tribe who he says were later ruled by a woman called Medusa. Now that's very different from the view of Gorgons that we have of this small number of women with snaky hair and whatever. But the version of Medusa that we see in Bronze Age Greek pottery and other images is quite different from the Roman version of the beautiful woman with snakes on her head. I'm going to have to come down and point this out. So the Bronze Age Greek version of the Gorgon is somebody who has very prominent lips, a broad nose, and tight curly hair, which she wears in long snake-like braids. So what does that remind you of? Yeah? That maybe there were people like this? I know, it's something that I would love to do more research on, but there are a few Greek vases as well which show pictures of Amazons who very clearly have very dark skin. So, and the more I learn about the queens of Kush, who were around in the time of the Roman Empire, the more obvious it seems that there were definitely lots of warrior women in Africa in ancient times. So, what about trans Amazons? Do we have any trans women amongst the Amazons? Well, we certainly have them amongst the Scythians, because we've again got historical record of this. So Hippocrates, for example, talks about eunuchs amongst the Scythians who perform female work and speak like women. Now, interestingly, Herodotus tells us that the Scythians preferred to ride geldings for their war horses. You can ride a a stallion, of course, because a stallion is a really aggressive animal. It's good for fighting. But if you're trying to have a cavalry unit, you don't want to have stallions in it, because the thing that stallions like fighting best is other stallions. So having a bunch of stallions in a military unit is really not a good idea. That means that you either equip your army with mares, or you equip them with geldings. And if you're equipping them with geldings, that means that you know how to do castration. Right? Because a horse is a really valuable thing. You don't want to perform an operation on it and have it die on you. So if you know how to do castration well, that means that you can have a population of eunuchs. And you know, all the male historians can say, oh, they would have died from the operation, poor fellows, losing their... No, because they were really good at doing castration in the ancient world. It was a common operation. And we've got at least one example of what seems to be a burial of an Inaris, in that it's a tomb containing a bunch of people wearing female clothing, and most of the skeletons seem to be female, but one of them appears to be somebody who's likely to have been assigned male at birth. So what exactly did the Sicilian eunuchs do in terms of feminization? Well, one possibility is that Sicilians were actually quite fond of chewing licorice root, because it was a good means of going without water for long distances if you were riding a long way. And it also happens to be quite a powerful anti-androgen, so it suppresses the effect of testosterone on the body. But if you've followed any of this stuff on the internet, then you might have seen talk about some material that Ovid, the Roman poet, wrote. So he talks here about some sort of noxious venom coming from mares, female horses. I've put the Latin up there for anybody who's interested. Now, the Scythians were famed for their witchcraft. Romans talk about Scythian witches quite a bit. And Ovid actually talks about a witch who knows how to make this substance. He doesn't specifically identify her as Scythian, but witch and Scythian does tend to go together in Roman writing. And Herodotus tells us that the Inaris were soothsayers. So again, you would expect a certain connection to witchcraft. And from here, you can elaborate in that we happen to know that the first hormone treatment for trans women was derived from the urine of pregnant mares. It was a medicine known as Primarin, pregnant mare urine. Thankfully, we don't use that anymore, because the way in which they obtained it was really quite cruel to the horses. But it was for a long time a key part of the treatment regime for trans women. Now, we know that in tribal societies, people outside of the gender binary are often seen as magical and work as shaman or equivalent thereof. So the Inaris might have been people who were guardians of this hormonal wisdom, if they had known about it. And if Ovid knew about it, of course, then other people in Rome would have known about it as well, including the priesthood of Cybele. And the very famous tombstone that I've got here is of a senior priestess of the cult of Cybele, that these were people who were all trans women. There were people who underwent castration and lived for the rest of their lives as women in order to serve in this priesthood. So the question is, did Roman trans women not only get surgery in the form of castration, but also hormone treatment? That's this magical stuff from the Scythians that people seem to know about. And you can find lots of references on the internet which tell you that this is in fact true, and that Ovid confirms it. So when I found this, I thought I'd better do a little bit of research and check with people who know a bit of Latin and stuff like that. I'm sorry to say that this one is busted. The noxious venom that Ovid is talking about is actually a substance called Hippo. It's a substance that appears on the foreheads of foals when they're born, and it was believed in the ancient world to be a powerful aphrodisiac. So that's what we know about it. It's mentioned by many other Roman writers, including Cicero, and I should give thanks here to my friend Liz Bloyne, who's a professor of Latin literature at Royal Holloway, well, doctor, I think, rather than professor. professor. And also to Margot Sprout, who's a PhD student at the Sorbonne in Paris, who's an expert on horses in the ancient world. So it's all rather sad. The story comes from this book by Timothy Taylor, who's actually a very good archaeologist. He's a professor at the University in Vienna these days, but he wrote that book shortly after completing his PhD, and sadly he didn't check some of the facts terribly well, and he does say in there that Ovid talks about the Scythians using hormones to treat the Inaris, and that sadly does not stack up. Now that doesn't mean, of course, that they never used hormones. They might have known about it, but Ovid does not confirm this, which is a bit sad. Anyway, what about Britain? Did we have any Amazons in Britain? Well, we know that in the year 175, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius defeated the Sarmatians in battle. It's those Sarmatians again. And as part of the peace treaty, they provided him with a force of 8,000 cavalry to serve in the Roman army. 5,500 of those were sent to Britain. Poor devils, they must have frozen their asses off in northern Britain. But there they were, and this is a tombstone which you can find in the museum in Chester. I was up there earlier, late last year, and it's still there, you can see it. So there's this large force of Sarmatian cavalry who are stationed in Britain. And in 2004, excavations at Brougham Castle in Cumbria found the graves of 2 soldiers buried with horses, buried with weaponry, and buried with quite a lot of money, which showed that they were very rich, very well paid, and they were women, right? So what this tells us is that there were women warriors in that Sarmatian cavalry unit, because the Roman cavalry were very, very well paid. And they had all of the accoutrements of being cavalry warriors. Now you think you've got women serving in this unit who've gone all the way from the north coast of the Black Sea to Britain with a whole bunch of men, and they're there at the far reaches of the Roman Empire. Got 2 women together. Probably you're not going to do that unless you're really, really good friends, because you need to back each other up against the guys. So what we probably have here is the first evidence of a lesbian couple in Britain. Thank you.